Welcome, everyone. This is Dr. Thor Templar, and we're going to talk about radionics, orgone, tachyon, etc. This has been going on for about 20 years now with the kind of interesting rebirth of radionics into a kind of strange and kind of demented reality of fake energies, etc. Because people have, instead of spending their time analyzing these very interesting consciousness circuits that create energies to make massive changes, people have tried to ignore the fact that the circuitry means anything. The famous radionic writer and practitioner David Tansley ultimately said after writing all his books, you don't need any, it's all psychic. He said this on his cancer deathbed in the 50s. So the whole idea is that, what value does that have? Well, we do have practical nurses and other ones who in the late 60s and 70s who worked with radionic people, psychic nurses, and worked with doctors, stating how important the machinery was and how important actual electric machinery was, amplified radionics compared to non-amplified. Meaning these just circuits that don't have any electricity in them, which tend to be a very large psychic crutch. And they do work, but they work very slowly, and their failure rate is much, much higher than anything that's amplified. So anytime you're doing any kind of, quote, biophysical psychic work, you need to amplify it. And this is why there's such pitiful results that are being gotten by people right now. There's the fact that they're really not amplifying. They get lots of books talking about techniques and other things, and of course we sell lots of these ourselves, but there's no amplification in it. So this is something we've recently started to do in the guild, is we're amplifying all of our magical and non-magical type tools using very specific and tested amplifiers that pick up a lot of resident energy. So you just can't amplify something with a solid state amplifier. You have to do it right when it comes into this biophysical realm. So that's number one. And of course, no one's really done that with their so-called radionic or orgone machines. They're amplifying them with standard amplifications, solid state. This doesn't work well. We tried this for years. We were one of the first to come out with, quote, wish type machines. We use solid amplifiers, quality built in Europe, and they did produce okay results. But they're not the kind of kick-ass results that everybody looks for, because you can't pick up these biophysical psychic resonances with standard amplifiers. It just doesn't work. It's the same thing with lasers. It was the Guild who came out with the first lasers. We were the first to build metaphysical radionic machines and helmets. We were the first to build these very, which would be, I call them kind of primitive now, but 20 years ago they were these flow energy patterns, non-electric units based on a lot of the research done at that time, particularly by Charles Casimato, who we published his books. We built machines based on his designs. It all came from the 40s and 50s, where they were using this Ruth Drown type non-electric technology. These worked okay, and people who are psychically strong or good magicians, or people who have some sort of basic empowerment, do well with these machines. The average person doesn't, because there's virtually nothing happening there. This is still the case today with people producing these kind of machines. We basically have what's on the market today inexpensively are non-electric machines that are nothing more than really psychic tuners. And of course the pattern they form with the dials and the wires do produce a certain level of energy, although low. There are other ones that are amplifying pretty much the exact same circuitry, and they're amplifying it with a lot of energies that don't really make any sense. This whole orgone craze is nonsense and doesn't work well in any kind of machines. We tried this for a while because it was the fad, and the bottom line is it didn't do anything. We just slapped stuff on there, and we're producing much more higher energies. So all of this stuff is really nonsense and doesn't work, and never has. You can find these Orgone machines all over the net, people getting rid of them now because they plain and simple don't work. And they're very expensive for really a plastic box with some dials on it and some little resin goop of stuff that the masses are interested in, because any idiot can make a Orgone, or what they call Orgone, which is some sort of resin goop with stuff poured into it. Now, these are very attractive and interesting. They produce very little energy, plain and simple. And nobody has done anything with this stuff in the last 20 years that it's been used consistently. There's no reports on it to do anything else. The manufacturers have nothing to say about their products, and they've produced nothing. They've made a lot of money in their pocket. They've been pushed by less than credible people. The Orgone industry was started by who is a Satanist, and basically it's a big laugh of how they've made money on people, pushing very expensive technologies on them and then verifying with who. I made it, I say it's great, I invented it, you buy it. I mean, really. This is the kind of stuff that plagues all alternative health and alternative products in general, is that because of the problems with certain ridiculous laws and so forth, that it's very difficult to be open of what you're doing. So, but of course, people have to be careful there as well. I'm sure a lot of practitioners, similar to the people who started Orgone, would have made outrageous claims for them if they could, and that shouldn't. I don't believe any claims should be made from anybody, and particularly from doctors who we can see the results of their work in all of the graveyards. So the whole idea is that we need to understand this. Now, moving into, Orgone is fascinating, and Wilhelm Reich had some very interesting philosophies and understanding, which I generally very agree with. People don't seem to understand that Orgone is another word for orgasm, and Wilhelm Reich was heavily involved in the whole Freudian sexuality type thing, which after years and years of research, anybody who doesn't understand that your major goal or your psychotic cravings in life that really go above everything else has to deal with sexuality. So he was really correct. Until people understand sexuality and deal with it properly, we're going to have all sorts of problems. And I don't think that's ever going to happen. I used to, in the past, poo-poo this and laugh at it and Freud's things and so forth. The point is that's in everybody's consciousness every second of the day. That's all people do, and now it's even further stimulated by the access of pornography at the click of a button. So the whole idea is that this is a real problem. But that's where he got all his information. He was combining these things together with, and the fact that Orgone, chi, prana is all, this is nonsense. It is not all one thing, and I can't talk about that all in one audio here. We'd be going on for hours. So I am a interested researcher in this area, but the problem is anytime you accumulate energy, and that's what you do with any Orgone, of course real Orgone, not some powdery stuff stuffed in that any stooge can make that can get a mold in a bottle of resin. Orgone is by using using steel wool and pure wool in many, many layers to condense atmospheric energy. The problem is the atmosphere is filthy. It's polluted to the utmost degree. We're living in a very radioactive society where almost every nuclear power plant is leaking. They're all now 50, 60 years old, and there's major problems. Who cares? Well, let's keep sucking all that energy in. Reminds me of when I used to drive down Sunset Boulevard in Los Angeles, which seemed to be was a beautiful road, and it was a favorite for joggers. So, there'd be hundreds of cars going by, and they're running next to the cars, spewing out all this pollution. I can't believe that in any way could be healthy for you, to take in huge amounts of carbon monoxide and all the other pollutions you get from gasoline to run behind them. And you could stay in your garage and turn on your car engine and just jog, get a gate, and get a little high before you die. So the whole idea is that this kind of stupidity doesn't make any sense. The Mayo, the number one Orgone researcher, states that it's virtually impossible to use Orgone because you're drawing in these toxicities, because you're accumulating it from the atmosphere. This was the problem even with the Hieronymus, who had a particular similar type of accumulating device that you would stick in the ground. Now, all the reports from that ended up saying that you were drawing in all these horrible energies from it, and people had to take these out of the ground. They worked real well, but drawing the energy from what? So, the only pure energy that I've been using for many, many years is tachyon. And you can go to our Tachyon page and go over to the people that have very credible products. Now, these aren't fantastic energy, nor is this Orgone or anything else to it. There does seem to be something to it. We've tested Tachyons. They do have an effect. But we got to also understand the physical effects, and without huge amounts of testing, which are very complicated, take a long time to do, it's very difficult to tell the effectiveness. We have found they are generally effective. We've used them, and it is a very pure energy. Now, you got to remember that tachyon uses antennas. It doesn't accumulate. So it's connecting to energies that are there, not condensing them. It's a big difference. Not only that, tachyons are at a very high level of energy, supposedly faster than the speed of light, and this means that you're not picking up all the common toxic energies in your environment. So this is a much better way to go. People haven't done this because it's more sophisticated. It costs more. And of course, it's real science, just like lasers and other things. And of course, alternative people don't seem to be into real science. They seem to be into arcane sciences that, while forming a nice foundation, are not very applicable to modern times. So it has to be a nice combination. If you're going to amplify a radionic unit using these things, you're causing, and the bigger you use of this fake orgone, because it's not orgone at all, it's nothing what the actual discoverer had in mind of it. It's a combination of white gold powders and so many other things, along with this, particularly in the traditional so-called orgonite. So the whole idea is that these things don't make much sense, and we've tested these units, and they do produce real negative energy. And people that use these units consistently, and the reason why you see so many for sale is because it makes you sick. They do not draw in positive energies. Now, you can try and cancel this out with all the tunings you want. The problem is trying to tune radionic instruments is very difficult. The minute you get over 3 dials, your error rate is almost 100%. It's very difficult for the average person to do that. So lots of dials, which people think give you more power, is very complicated. We need to start minimizing our dialing. And of course, this is for professionals. The new units that we will be producing will be relatively automatic by inserting the numbers that you need. Now, this has always been something that radionic people have been interested in. What they have is called rate books. You go into a rate book, somebody else came up with the numbers, and you just dial it into the machine because it's a big pain in the butt to do this. Plain and simple. Dialing rates all the time deals with core energies, is very tiring, and takes very expert knowledge. This is why radionics really never has caught on, because it's just too difficult. It certainly is fascinating, but when you start making all these dialings, you're not going to. And how many people are that sensitive? The stick plate, which is the common way with running your finger back and forth over a stick plate to get some sort of grabbing, is so nebulous and so poorly being able to regulate that you're getting ballpark numbers which aren't good. You have to go step by step with a pendulum. And if this is a 0 to 100 dial, you can see the problems with it. Now, there's lots of tricks there, and we teach this in our consciousness machine course. But the point is this is the problem with it. Now, there's always been the same old problem with the alternative technologies. And that is, how well do they work? And of course, ultimately, these things are used for, well, I've personally not really used them in any kind of medical way or healing way. Very rarely. I've used them metaphysically. But the industry generally is all about, this is what you're going to use to heal yourself. Now, books like Healing with Radionics, which I recommend everybody get a copy of, you can find these. It's out of print, but they're available everywhere at a pretty low price. States how they healed everybody. with all types of units, and it really even to the extreme. I think they mentioned using some sort of bells or something. So, disregarding how important, again, as I open this talk, the actual technology is. So, when we get into this, we need to understand that. But they claim to have cured everything. But what's interesting about that book, which I'll do a review on in another audio, is the fact that they also were able to assist the healing process over a fairly long period of time. It wasn't instantaneous, and this is another problem. Meaning, if you were sick with a disease and you had to go into standard treatments and it took a few months, well, it would take a few months with radionics as well. So this is something important to understand, and we just don't know. What's out there is a mishmash of nonsense. There are really no professional organizations that are doing anything. And while there are people all over the world using these kinds of technologies, we really have no solid information. It's supposedly legal in England. Well, it really isn't. The practitioners I've talked to over there seem to be scared children. They're afraid to do anything or talk about anything. And of course, you're not going to get any doctor, which is part of the British requirements, to work with you. They're not going to give you support. They're going to be ridiculed. And of course, they're all part of the same criminal medical industry that the entire world is. There's certainly nothing special about England, and may be even worse there with their ridiculous laws and their feudalism that continues there. So we look at all that, and what does that mean? So the point is, no one has looked at the circuitry. What I used to chuckle about when they had the Psychotronic Association, which was fairly active 20 years ago in the United States, which is kind of coming back now, they talk about colors, sound waves. Well, that's not what it's all about. What about the actual machines? What's in them? What circuits work better? None of this is ever discussed. People come in there and hawk their wares, talk about their books, which are kind of almost not related to the subject whatsoever. What about machine technologies? So there's so much disinformation. As I said, those disinformation agents, those paid criminals, have went out there and pushed this whole fake orgone because it doesn't work. They want you to work with orgone because how it is today in its bastardized form doesn't work. It never has. So, and the people involved with it tend to be the people at the most lowest levels. This can be verified on YouTube, and you'll find out how certain top Satanists say who their mentor was. Everybody should check that out. So the whole idea is, what do we have here? I've talked to so many people around the world, and people are hawking their instruments and ultimately come down to the same conclusion that the cancer-ridden Tansley came up with, is that the machines mean nothing. So, well, I guess nobody he knew could heal him, and he couldn't heal himself. I mean, these are things we have to look at. The whole area is shrouded in mystery deliberately. This is part of the disinformation campaign to make everything gray and strange. Why did certain people fail? We go back to the original creators of radionics. Ruth Drown was tested, the famous chiropractor who had great success until she was harassed, but we don't know, because of the lack of communication in those times, what her success rate was. She failed horribly when was tested, but was that deliberate on her part to take the pressure off of her? Most likely she was blackmailed and threatened, and this failed deliberately. Other people like Albert Abrams, the inventor of this type of technology, or at least the first people to mass produce it, never allowed himself to be tested, and then died fairly young from what apparently was a passing virus, which he couldn't handle with his great technologies. I mean, he's put great problems in looking at technology. When you look at the major person who invented the technology, who was wealthy but wanted to make lots more money instead of getting this out to the public to help them. So he made a fortune selling non-electric boxes filled with goop so you couldn't tell what the wiring was because the wiring was a joke. Basically, what he was falling into is the placebo effect and the psychic tuning effect. This can be powerful in certain areas, but even to his own self, obviously he couldn't cure himself, and he died. just as Tansley couldn't, and so many other ones. If you fall away from understanding the guts of radionics and the actual machine process of radionics, the consciousness machine, and I have an entire course on this, and people should make sure they go to the website and check out that course. Consciousness machines work extremely well. You're not, but if you fall away from it and you think everything is based on psychic power and placebo, unamplified psychic power, and you think that's going to change your life, you're wrong. It won't. It doesn't work. I've been in this field for 40 years now. I have every major produced radionic machine that's been around since the 1920s. I work with Drown, Hieronymus, all sorts of recent machines. So I've worked with them all. Delaware machines, you name it, I have the machine, which are supposed to be built in a time when things are really working. So I've looked at all of them, their guts and so forth, and this is what we need to study. Why did these work? We don't need to study color energies and other things, ignore the circuitry, because people are too stupid to understand what is consciousness machine circuitry, which I have an institute researching, and this is another thing people can access and understand. Well, how do you make these machines? What is this? What is this consciousness technology you're talking about? How does that integrate? This is the next level of science. Science has really been stuck in very boring Newtonian physics, which only work to a very primitive level. In the 21st century and beyond, there's a whole new science that has happened. Not only the birth of really active quantum physics, which isn't really new, but now it's being applied everywhere because it works. Now, all of this is a serious problem when people get caught in these traps, spend lots of money thinking something happened. But who's going to spend the time to do all this tuning of machines and training themselves properly? I mean, to really train yourself to use these machines, especially that have so many dials, you have to spend a large amount of time practicing and understanding what you're doing. So rates in themselves, meaning predetermined numbers you put in your machine, generally work poorly. What you're doing is buying into something else that someone did. But, you know, when it comes to consciousness machines, they tune into the individual. So if you want to get a rate for something, you really need to get your own rate for that particular situation at that particular time and space. If you're using something that was produced 30, 40 years ago, well, what does all that mean? You're using other people's rates, and these are very much ballpark, and certainly not a way to get good results. And anybody that understands how these machines actually function understands how worthless rates tend to be. But there are some value to them to get you ballpark again. But there should be an aspect that you have to do this yourself and put your own energy into it. There are very few things in life that work just on autopilot. There has to be some adjusting and everything else. I mean, even though, let's say, an X-ray machine can take an X-ray, you have to position the machine so that it is X-raying the particular area that you're interested in, whatever that may be. So, if you have a broken arm, you don't want to X-ray the entire body. What's the point? So you want to position the machine over that. So even those more crude technologies require individual work. And when we get into this consciousness machine area, it's huge amounts. So to have a machine that really works well requires very advanced engineering, which only the guild offers, and of course myself with a doctorate in subtle energy physics. You really have to understand subtle energy physics. If you don't, you can't make this very advanced technology. It's just as simple as that. What people did in the past, most of these machines are very well made physically, and they have very typical wiring that go through them to potentiometers, etc. Some people prefer different guts of it, and we have to know, can we compare a potentiometer against a capacitor? Now, a lot of them had tunable capacitors in them, the older machines. And people say, well, this works and we should stay with that. Well, I don't know how much better those are or not. Capacitors are difficult to obtain. They're very big, so you need a very deep machine. And frankly, other than Hieronymus, who used these, everybody else who got results are using capacitors. are using potentiometers on I should say. So all of the British machines that people have claimed to get all these results from are all there I go again, potentiometer based. Now, potentiometers, of course, are slightly different than capacitors. And again, we don't really care what their electrical use is in common products. How are they working for consciousness machines? So we need to test all this, and nobody does it. So one of the most famous cases is the very touted Peter Kelly, who still makes Hieronymus type copied machines. He worked with Hieronymus, I believe. I'm not sure what the entire history there. He must be getting up in years. Of course, I do remember about 20 years ago that he was asking for money to take his now sick breast cancer infected wife to regular doctors. Well, here we go again. Why are you asking for money like that? Why can't your technology do something? And as with all people that sell these things and get money for things, they seem never to be able to use it in their own life practically. So I mean, these are huge brick walls. Here's a person that claims that these things are fantastic for agricultural, for everything else, and when a push comes to shove, he's begging for money to go to a regular doctor. Very scary, people. Very scary. So what are you supposed to do in the public? You're going to invest several $1,000s in a machine like that? Well, I don't think that's a lot of money in this day and age. People are dropping hundreds and even thousands of dollars for worthless products that do absolutely nothing. But these aren't automatic machines. You're going to have to sit there and learn how to use them. Nobody really wants to do that. And this goes with all types of training. They want people either to do it for them or they want a very simple type of machine where it can be. Now, this can happen, but ultimately, there has to be at least a minor amount of personal tuning or dial, getting certain numbers for your particular situation so you can finite what is happening. So it goes on and on with these things, and the only continuous in production unit that's out there right now is the SE5, which Don Paris has been selling for many years. Interesting unit. I'm not a big fan of any computerization because it really gets away from consciousness. If you turn the control over to computer, you're missing the boat. I've never seen any great results with the SE5. People spend a lot of money for them and say how wonderful they work. And then I say, well, where's the proof in your life? They have nothing to show for it. So one person I knew who was big on this, the minute had many illnesses in the family and ran down to Mexican clinics. Well, certainly the SE5 didn't clear that out and help them as I've never seen anything presented by Paris that shows us any kind of startling results. And here we go again. We have problems with legalities as well. So everybody's always stuck in between there. But you would think that there would be, after 20 or 30 years of selling the SE5, that there would be a book stacked with information on stating its success. There just isn't of what's been done here. So here we go again with some severe problems of what does this do? And if it's only going to be a psychic crutch, and there's not going to be anything really more to it, then what does that mean? Do we really want this to spend that kind of money for that? Well, I think everyone should, and I think this is a fascinating area. And taking control of your basic life on a metaphysical, even a financial level where you can empower it, and of course on a physical level. Everybody's going to get sick or is sick, etc. So having technologies that you're trying to work with to take care of your own self and not buy into a medical system designed to bankrupt you and put you in a hole is critically important to your survival. What these things do, and I've looked at metaphysical tools for over 40 years now, is they're all pretty pathetic. So they don't produce the kind of results we want to, but nothing does. You don't have any guarantees going to doctors. What you have with most doctors, you have more of a guarantee of being harmed than helped. Certainly the breakthrough, the only major medical breakthrough that we've ever had, has been antibiotics. And if those don't work, you're pretty much screwed. There's no place to go. They have minor drugs to treat symptoms, and these things can be valuable. I mean, if you're an asthmatic, having an inhaler saves your life. These drugs are good, but there's no cure for it. There's no cure for dandruff. There's no cure for acne. There's no cure for anything. There are certain treatments, and all of these treatments are semi-detrimental and can be major detrimental to your health. So there is no answers there either, and that's an illusion. And of course, everybody runs to the establishment when they get sick saying, "Save me." Well, they're not going to save you. They're going to charge you a lot of money, and you're going to end up dead. The graveyards prove that. Life expectancy in the United States is plummeting because of the problem with diabetes, which is pandemic, and other things of disillusioned people who are going on drugs, and the now huge amounts of problems with deaths from drugs. Which is interesting because they're not illegal drugs. A lot of these drugs are pharmaceutical drugs, which of course are provided by the doctors to criminals to sell to you on the street. So the whole idea is this is how it works, people. So it's about time that everyone understands this and starts living in an illusion that there's something great going on there. So these whole areas are quite fascinating. But as usual, and we must remember that disinformation, plants, and other things go into all the major organizations and disrupt them. This is what happens. Plain and simple. So if there's a burgeoning radionic organization, they're going to move their people in there to cause problems. They already do. That's why these organizations have achieved nothing and do nothing. They're dead standstill. The Radionic Association of Britain is pretty pathetic. It only has courses that you can go there like it's a real college. But even when you go there as a real college, you really can't treat people properly. You have to work with a doctor anyway, and no doctor's going to work with you. They're all terrified, from what I've talked to of the people over there, for many years. So this is a real problem that, of course, is not confronted by people because there's a serious problem with everybody's a coward. Nobody will stick together and nobody will fight for anything. Certainly the Brits are famous for this in their entire way of operating, and their Radionic Association shows this. There's nothing there. They don't have libraries. They don't have banks of machines. They don't even have a little museum of products. All this stuff doesn't make any sense to me. And of course, I'm sure the kind of income for the Radionic Association is pretty small. But whatever it is, last time I saw, they were trying to rent out office space in their building. I don't know if they own it or what, so they could make extra money because they didn't need it. You don't need extra space? Well, that seems madness to me. But we can see how this is with all alternative things. So if there is a burgeoning anything, and because it's hard to make a living, it's dog eat dog in the business to begin with. And when we further get into it, of course, as there is with everything on this planet, as they're paid, there are giant buildings filled with hundreds of employees that spend all day just causing trouble on the net. They're paid to do this. So this is how it all goes with the world, and we need to understand that. But, if organizations won't deal with the fact of what's the guts of this product, we're never going to get anywhere. It is not light energy. It is not tachyons. It is not orgone. What is the actual circuitry all about? And how can this circuitry be amplified? Now, if it can be amplified through other things, that's another step. And if we can feed any kind of energies in there that are positive to make better results, we need to test this. But there is certainly, when someone invents something and says this is it, it's kind of interesting that such a bogus technology would be pushed out there. And the two people that were in the Orgone game, it's very interesting. And of course, the other factor, the non-machine producing Orgone person, was kicked to the curb and, of course, folded over to the onslaught coming from the other camp. So this is all the problems that we're talking about here, and which cause a lot of problems if there's anything there. But certainly this contrived energy that's supposed to do something that's linked up with prana and all these other things, it doesn't make any sense at all. These are body energies. You condense energies using your machine with prana and chi. It's very different because these are condensed into your human body. Your human body takes these energies. You can't make a machine to reproduce the same thing. This is why they're consciousness machines, meaning you want to find ways to amplify your consciousness and body energies with tools, which are machines. You're not going to create this yourself, which will tell you. You're saying, well, this is a chi. There's no such thing as a chi machine. You've got some sort of frequency there that is nothing like human chi. Human chi is a bioenergy. So how is that going to be made by a machine? Well, we can't copy it. Can we amplify it? Yes. So, I mean, nobody seems to get the basic points here. And if we keep getting pushed down the wrong streets, pushed into dead ends, and then we're at the dead ends, they push our face against the wall, telling us that they have answers when their only thing they're doing is filling their own pockets, and have very dubious backgrounds. Not very dubious. These people involved in Orgone are out and out Satanists. Does anybody get that? So the bottom line is that we need to start getting into things that work. People need to start looking at the guts of things and figuring out how we can amplify bioenergies, otherwise called consciousness machines and subtle energy physics. That's what it's all about.